very weird to already start calling you seniors, but as of like 11 o'clock this morning, that's who you are. So congratulations. So just a quick announcement. About two quick announcements. One, please don't forget to go over to the upper school office to pick up your summer reading if you have not already done so. The other thing is we're going to be sending out some additional information on Google Drive about this presentation and also about some other resources that you can use for your college visits. So I'm really happy to introduce Dan Grayson, who's going to talk to you a little bit about getting the college essay started. Dan comes to us with maybe over 10 years of experience, about, working in college admissions. He was previously at Tufts University, and since leaving Tufts, he's sort of spent the last, 5 years or so traveling around the world, talking to students from Baltimore to Singapore about these very things. And so he's pretty knowledgeable. I also think he does it with a lot of humor and charm. And so you'll learn a lot about writing your supplements and writing your main content. And writing your Common App essay. So I'm not going to talk too much longer, but Dan Grayson.
So if you're in the last 3 rows, move up. You sit in the back and make a move.
Is that May?
You guys can sit on the side, but not in the very last row. So you can sit here, maybe that. You cannot sit in the literal furthest away place.
Very light. Very comfortable right here.
Very, very bad. I admire the severity of the transition. What's that? Yeah, thanks. Hello. Hey. So is this like literally the last thing between you and summer break?
Yes.
Love. Okay, so you are all here so that we can have a conversation that consists mostly of me talking about the essays you're all going to have to write for college admissions. And we're going to spend a while talking about essays, particularly because it's really the only place in your application where you have any control. In the moments when you submit the college app, everything else is out of your hands. Your grades are what they are. You can't like rewind time and retake the trait test. Your SAT scores, I mean, you could sit and take like the SAT or the ACT a second or third or fourth, heaven forbid, fifth, sixth time if you don't like your scores. But at a certain point, you got to make your peace with the number, and it is what it is. You can't like sign up for the debate club or something and have that count, in like December of your senior year. You can pick which teachers write your recs, but you can't write the recs, ideally. So the only thing you actually control in the moment when you hit submit on your college apps is the essay. That's it. And you have total control. Every word, every punctuation mark, every idea, every sentence, everything in it is yours, and you own it. And although you can ask for feedback from other people, and your parents may have strong opinions about what you should or should not do, the truth is, if you want to like erase the whole thing and paste something else in that like 30 seconds before you hit submit on the Common App or whatever other application you're using, you can. And it's a space that has a direct impact on the decisions that are made about your application and by extension your future, which I think is slightly terrifying. So, so what we're going to do is we're going to have a conversation about this thing that feels big, important, difficult, stressful, and how you make the most of it so that you have the impact you want to have on your application. That's it. It's not that bad. To do that, we're going to go through a couple of different things. I'm going to start by talking about the process of like how a college application works, how it goes from like submit to decision, real briefly. Then I'm going to talk about the goals of the admissions process. What are your goals as an applicant? What's the goal of the people reading your applications? I want to talk about things that I think you should avoid, mistakes that are made that are really common, and more importantly, why those mistakes are mistakes. You can, like if you've done visits at colleges, you've probably heard someone tell you not to write an essay about your grandparents, but they may not have explained like why that's actually a trap people fall into. Because I think you can write really great essays about your grandparents, and so I want to focus on what the mistakes are so that you know how to do that. And then the things that I think are reflective of most of the best essays. And then you guys can ask questions if you have them. We'll take a little break, and then we'll talk about supplements. Yay! Aren't you really so excited about all that? You guys look so thrilled to be here. The silence of misery is deafening. So we're going to start. We're going to start by talking about the process. We'll talk about the process. So how does a decision get made on your application? Well, what happens when you hit submit here in New York City and your application goes to other colleges in New York or Boston or Georgia or California or Alaska or wherever, right? What's happening with the applications that get submitted around the country in the United States? And so the first thing that will happen with your application is an academic review, which is comprised of 3 parts: curricular rigor, grades, and test scores. Your application gets evaluated by someone who looks at it and asks the bare minimum question: can this person come here and succeed? Have they been prepared enough academically to be able to do the work and graduate on time from my school? For the vast majority of applicants, and certainly for the vast majority of you, the answer to that is yes. But they do this evaluation, they'll give you a score. That score is on some scale that they make up. Once you get past that first hurdle, they'll look at everything else. They'll look at extracurriculars, they'll look at your teacher recommendations, your counselor recommendation, if you did an interview report, they'll look at that. Look at all these other parts of your application. They write about a paragraph or a paragraph and a half about you and why they like you or don't like you. Ideally, it's that first one. They'll do this sitting at their laptop, like working on a file. The only reason this picture's there is because I really like this photo of that dog. Just any excuse I can have for a dog in a tie to be working at it. Isn't he great? They go through thousands of these. They go into a committee process where all the applicants will come up from Berkeley Carroll all at once. If you're the only one, that's great, that's amazing. You're going to be the only one, fantastic. If you're not the only one, you get looked at as a group. And then you sit in committee as an admissions officer, and between 5 to 12 admissions officers will sit around the table, and these applications will come up one at a time, and they'll read that evaluation, that paragraph or paragraph and a half that got written about you, and the people around the table will listen, and then they will vote yes or no based on whether or not they liked it. And if the people around that table hear your evaluation, they hear what that admissions officer wrote about what you had to say and what your teachers had to say and your grades and your extracurriculars, and they think, oh my goodness, that sounded really exciting, then they vote yes, and you got into college, and you should celebrate and do something really fun and have a party, unless your best friend also applied to that college and did not get in, and then you should do something quieter because you want to rub it in. That's rude. What do you notice about this group? The lighting's not great, so you can't see them super well, but what do you notice about them?
They look young.
What's that?
They look young.
Yeah. If you go to admissions conferences, most admissions officers are under the age of 35. I would venture to say most are under the age of 30. This is like pretty typical in terms of the generational makeup of an admissions committee. So if you're picturing like old white bearded men with like tweed jackets dressed very formally, that's like not what this group is. What else do you notice? Well, that's not true. That's only true if you erase the brown guy sitting in the middle. They do tend to be white, but there's a fair amount of diversity in the room. I can tell you the backgrounds of the people in terms of what they study. So Justin was a history major, Trevor was a chemical engineer, Denny studied economics, and Emily studied theater. What else do you notice about them? Yeah, they're all on computers.
They're smiling.
They're having a good time. Committee is like actually a surprisingly good time. You sit in a room with people who are mostly your friends and you like joke around about things you probably shouldn't joke around about for like 8 hours, also while making decisions. There's usually food on the table because you're like locked in there and don't have anywhere to go and you need to keep people happy. Like this is not a miserable thing for the people who are going through it.
So essentially whoever writes that paragraph about you, that's it, like no one else writes like that paragraph. No one else reviews it that thoroughly as that person does.
Yeah, that's a good question.
And
So
if that paragraph is bad, then basically what gets read in that room are bad things about it.
what's your name? What's that? Carell? Carell.
Correct.
So that's really insightful. So often there'll be more than one person who reads your application, right? There'll be like a primary reader and then someone else will come along and be like, I agree or disagree. Some schools have like more than one person read your file at the exact same time and then they work together to write a review. In some cases though, it is one person who reads your application. That one person distills your entire application into one paragraph, which then becomes the case for your admission in a really literal way. So if the people who review your application don't quite like it, then you get in that room and you're not going very far. Because they're not opening up your file to read it all over again just because the first person who read it didn't like you. So what's your goal? We're going to talk about goals now. It was an amazing question. It wasn't really a question, it was a point, but it was a good point. So what's your goal? Your goal as an applicant, in a pretty literal way, is to ensure the person who reads your application loves you. That's the goal. I'm going to get to it in a moment. You need the person in that room to be ready to go to battle on your behalf. You're not there. So if you need 5 votes to get in and only get 4, you don't get to stand up and say, wait, hang on, I think you missed the point of my supplemental essay. Can we go back and read it again? You need the person in the room who wants to fight for you to stand up and do that, because that's what happens in the committee process. It's like not just standing around rubber stamping. People are really arguing about what to do and what not to do. And if you read a file and you feel passionately about that file as the admissions officer, and the people in the room aren't voting for that kid yet, then you stop the process and make the case. And your goal is to make sure the person who read your application loves you enough that they will do that for you. You are creating an advocate in a system that is built around advocacy. So what's their goal? They're reading the applications from Berkeley Carroll and from lots of other schools in New York City and around the world. And what's the goal of the person who reads your file, who opens the application and is trying to make the decision? And the goal of that person is really similar to yours. Their goal is to love you. They want, as hard as possible, in the least creepy way possible, to love you as hard as they can. You look uneasy with that. Me? Yeah.
Oh, no.
You're good with it?
People loving me.
So that's your goal. Your goal is to make them love you, and their goal is to love you. And I know that that's a little dissonant with how you feel about the admissions process, because if you're applying to schools that have reasonably low admit rates, if you're applying to a school that denies more people than they admit, there are lots of schools that have an admit rate below 50%. You don't have to apply to them, but if you do, and you apply to a school that admit rate below 50%, that's a school that denies more people than they admit. And if you're applying to a school like that, I think the goal, it starts feeling from your perspective like they have to be trying to deny me. If they're going to deny this many people, the purpose has to be to find the people to deny. And so you imagine somebody sitting there with a red pen, waiting for you to make some trifling, insignificant, petty punctuation mark errors so they can scratch you off a list and move on. Oh, you used a semicolon when a comma would have been enough. You didn't need to try to be fancy with it. Denied. Oh, you're talking about healthcare, but we're all talking about global warming. You should keep up. Denied. Your last name is this long string of vowels hyphenated with another last name that's a long string of consonants. I can't pronounce that. Best to save myself the effort. Denied. So you're laughing a little bit, which is nice. But also, I know emotionally, this is really what it feels like is happening. I promise I'm going to get to you. I haven't forgotten. Okay. We'll get back to that one. But if that's what they're doing, right? If they're looking for reasons to deny you, they're looking for your mistakes so they can kick you out of the process, then the group of people that's left, what you can say about the groups that gets admitted is that what they have in common is they don't make mistakes. That's the group that gets admitted if you're trying to say no. A group of people who don't make errors. And if you go, how many of you visited a college and like done an information session? They're not very good. How many of you have like heard an admissions officer come here and speak? Some of you. You know, there's a lot of rhetoric in college admissions around like what schools want to be, and I'm going to put aside the question of whether they achieve that rhetoric, but they talk about like wanting to create change and innovate and academic research, which academic research is just the creation of new knowledge, right? That's all that means. Learn something no one's learned before. And if you're going to be a school that does that, if you're going to be a school that like takes risks and innovates and creates, you have to be willing to make mistakes. Those things require fluency in errors. You cannot innovate without risk, and risk by definition requires the possibility of failure. If there's no possibility of failure, it's not a risk. And so what I want to do, even before I start talking about like what works and what doesn't, is I want to reframe the conversation for all of us together away from what is it that I'm supposed to do to what is it that I really feel like I've got to say. Because if you write the essay you're supposed to write, you write like the safe essay that your parents are completely 100% comfortable with. If you don't take some level of risk, then you're writing the exact same essay as everybody else who's writing the essay that they're supposed to write, because let's be real, you're all Googling the same thing. And then the person who's like sitting down and reading your application can't say anything about you that they can't say about everybody else in the applicant pool. They go into that room, and what happens is the committee sits around the table and they go, that sounds a lot like a lot of other students, and we have to say no somewhere. And so they end up saying no to you. What I want to do is I want to help you understand, even before I start telling you what works and what doesn't, like why it's critical to be able to look inward and ask yourself the hard question of what you feel you need to say, and then to have the bravery and the confidence and the boldness to say it. Like, I've come back and I've done this for a few years here, and you guys are not wallflowers. You have strongly held opinions about the world that you will drop into every conversation if possible. And some of you won't drop it into your essays, even though you'll drop it everywhere else. This is like not the moment to back up from the things you believe strongly about yourself, about the world, about ideas. And so I want to go from that, which should hopefully feel like about equal parts intimidating and exciting, to talking about the things that I think students do, they're not wrong, but the mistakes that students make that they don't need to make when they write these essays. And to do that, I'm going to talk about a couple of essay topics in particular, and I'm going to share with you why they don't work. I want to be like crystal clear though. I am not telling you you can't write an essay on these topics. I think you can write an essay on literally any topic and it can work. But students, when they write these topics, they make a certain set of mistakes over and over and over again, and I want you to know what those mistakes are so that you can avoid them. Does that make sense? You can write on literally anything. Don't make these mistakes. You're all okay with that? Thanks, thank you for nodding a little bit. So the first essay I want to talk about are essays about grandparents. I foreshadowed it. Now we're here. Do any of you have like a really fantastic grandparent? You're like, your grandparent's really, what's your name? Greg, okay. Greg, who's your favorite grandparent? You have to pick one.
My grandmother.
Your grandmother, Dee Dee. Dee Dee is her given name, or it's what you call her? Evelyn, but you call her Grandma Dee Dee. Just Dee Dee. Why? She goes by Dee Dee, but her name is Evelyn. Sounds like a great grandma. So Greg, you and I are going to play a game. This game is called Who Has the Better Grandparent? Greg, I'm going to tell you about my grandfather. His name's Paul. He goes by Grandpa, with me, at least. I'm going to tell you a little about him, and then when I'm done, I want you to tell me whether you think Dee Dee is better than Grandpa. That's the game. If you want, you can make an entire argument. I'm open to that, but you can also just say yes, no, maybe, whatever you want to do. So, my grandfather, who was born in Milwaukee and grew up there, attended the University of Chicago, where he graduated at the age of 18 with a degree in agricultural economics, After that, he joined the U.S. Army, where he was stationed on the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. That's the bit that trails down towards Russia, where he was responsible for collecting weather records while digging ice forts to keep himself alive. After the war, he went and joined U.S. Customs, where he learned more about botany and ferns than anyone I've ever met. He went and got his PhD from Cornell, and then went on to work at the U.S. Census, where he published a number of papers on overlapping statistical collections that ended up changing the way the U.S. Census conducts its research. In his retirement, he wrote poetry based on passages from the Bible and music so that that poetry could be performed by voice and piano, and he was invited by African-American gospel choirs to sing in their churches, even though my family was Jewish.
Seems like a really smart guy, but I don't argue that.
That was way harsh, but I respect the call. So here comes the follow-up question. And the follow-up question is really obvious. I know it's obvious. I apologize for it, but we're going to get somewhere. So the follow-up question is, I told you a bunch of things about my grandfather. What did I tell you about me? Nothing. You saw it coming, right? You knew it was nothing. That's an obvious question. Why are we talking about this if it's so obvious? And the reason we're talking about this is because this is the mistake all of the Common App essay prompts invite you to make. Most essay prompts, if you boil them down, are about influence. Describe a person and the impact of that person on your life. Describe an event and the impact of that event on your life. An idea and the impact of that idea on your life. Describe a time you went out and got a cup of coffee and how it changed the world. Or the time you saw a double rainbow and the way it made you look inwardly and see something new. And if you got an essay like this for English or history class, you do something really specific with it because it's what you've been taught to do for our academic argumentation. You have a 5-paragraph essay with a thesis statement at the bottom of an inverted pyramid, followed by body paragraph number 1 with a supporting detail, body paragraph number 2 with a supporting detail, body paragraph number 3 with a supporting detail, and a conclusion where you find a way to restate your thesis without sounding like all you're going to do is restate your thesis. Does that sound familiar to you? You were nodding more vigorously than I expected. And there are a couple of reasons why that format doesn't work for this. The first is that if you were going to write an essay like that about Dee Dee, right? You're going to write that essay. You'd have an inverted pyramid, right, with a thesis statement. Dee Dee influenced my life in these ways. Body paragraph number 1 about Dee Dee and Dee Dee's life and where she grew up. Body paragraph number 2 on the family she created and how that family exists now. Body paragraph 3 on how that family and how Dee Dee's voice in particular influences you, and then a conclusion where you restate that Dee Dee had an influence on you. That sounds familiar, right? And in that essay, how much of that is actually about you? 1 paragraph, maybe 1.5 if you're really good with the introduction and conclusion. Maybe 2. But most of the essay is not about you. And the other thing that academic argumentation sort of fails here for, and there's a big difference between a personal statement and an argumentative essay, is no one needs you to prove that your grandmother matters to you. The crux of that thesis is my grandma matters. Nobody needs you to prove that. Who's going to read that essay and go, that second supporting paragraph was weak. I just don't think Dee Dee's that great. No one's going to do that. And the truth is, what your influence is doesn't really matter because your influences are everything. I don't know if any of you are big Star Trek fans. I am. I know you don't care. I really like The Next Generation in particular. My favorite character is an android. Yes, thank you. An android called Data. He calls himself a heuristic artificial life form, and heurism is just a fancy word for learning from experience. And the irony of Data's character is that he wants to be more human but isn't human and will never be human, but that it's the struggle to be human that makes him the most human. It's deep. And this is all of us. We are all heuristic life forms. We learn and are influenced by everything all the time. How many of you have family? Just raise your hands if you have family. Yep, that's right. Even your teachers raise their hands for this. How many of you would say you've been influenced by your family? Raise your hand. I just went on a family vacation with my mom and my dad, and I was like, oh my God, I cannot believe all the ways they've influenced me. It was a little horrifying. Of course you've been influenced by your family because you're influenced by everything. Every person you meet, every idea you come across, every experience that you have leaves some imprint on you, big or small. So that these things are influences on you is not interesting because your influences are every single thing you've ever encountered. What's important here is not what the influence is, it's how you've been changed by it. Who are you now because of it? I don't want to know what the influence is. I want to know, how has the way you see yourself transformed because you got challenged? How has your understanding of something important in the world deepened because you got exposed to something new? How have your goals for the future taken a new shape or found a new path because you realized someone kicked your ass enough not to look at the thing in the old way? And that's the essay you got to write. If you're going to write about your grandmother, then you have to talk about, like, who are you now? Not who you were before. Not who you were as a middle schooler. You were all terrible as middle schoolers. So if you're like looking back at your middle school days and like, look at how much I've changed since middle school, yeah, no kidding. All middle schoolers are awful. Do not compare yourself to middle schoolers. Right? Like, I want to know who you are today. What has this person, what has this experience, what is this idea that has shaped you? And I believe it shaped you. But what has it given you? What shape do you have now because of it? And that's a much more difficult essay to write. But it is the essay that divides, that is the line that divides good from mediocre. The next topic I want to talk about are essays about, are any of you athletes? Are any of you runners? Cross country? What's your name?
Abby.
Hi, Abby. We're going to do a recreation of the average cross-country runner's essay. Are you ready? You don't look ready, but we're going to do it anyway. I'm going to do a slight exaggeration of the average cross-country runner's essay, and then when I'm done, I want you to tell me what you think you learned about me as a result. You look ready now. Abby, it was the day of the big race, and I've been training for this race for months. I was really nervous about it, but my mom always says you can't finish something unless you start it, so when the metaphoric gun went off, so did I. I was going along, running really well. I wasn't at the front of the pack, that was too bad, but I also wasn't at the back of the pack. Nice. Then we started climbing the first hill, and where I train, we don't have hills like this. And I was so exhausted. I got to the top of that first hill, I thought I'd never be able to make it up the second hill. And the second hill came, and it was even higher than the first. I thought I'm never going to make it. I got halfway up that hill, and I dug down deep, and I found something else inside me. I made it to the top of that hill, and I realized maybe I can finish this race. And I went up a third hill and a fourth hill, and then I finished the race, and that was the day I learned, Eddie, that if you are determined and do not give up, all things are possible. Eddie, what'd you learn about me?
I'm not using all things are possible.
It's true. You learned that I'm an optimist because I ran. It's probably the goodest answer I can come up with. The challenge of these essays is, and it's not just strings, right? It's lots of different versions of this. Maybe it's like the big Bach concerto and you play the violin and you keep getting this one part wrong in rehearsal, but then when you go up for the recital, you nail it, right? Practice makes perfect. Or it's the theater production and you're like doing Pippin and everything backstage is like going wrong, but the show must go on. Or it's like a debate team meet against some team that's never been defeated anymore, but you defeated them by 1 point, yay! Or maybe you didn't defeat them, maybe you lost by 1 point, but you tried your best and the trying is the thing that mattered, right? Like you don't necessarily have to succeed, the essay still works, maybe you're running up that's part of the second hill, and you trip and you fall and you break your leg, and you get up anyway and continue running with a piece of bone jutting out of your thigh, doing permanent physical damage to your body because you will not quit, even when you probably should. The moral of these essays is always the same. Drive, determination, commitment, passion, resolve. Interchangeable words for hard work. And it's not that hard work doesn't matter. Hard work is really important. Hard work is very important. You gotta have the grit, you gotta have the resilience, you gotta have the determination. The mistake that these essays make is that they're talking about a quality that someone can learn by looking at your high school transcript. They can look at the classes you've taken, how difficult those classes are, and whether or not you've succeeded in those classes, and to what extent, and they will learn what your capacity is for hard work in an academic setting. The mistake that these essays make is that they're reiterating a quality that someone can learn by looking at nothing more than your GPA and your classes. I mean, do any of you seriously feel like you can hand someone a copy of your high school transcript and they will understand the most important things about who you are as a human being? God, I'm so glad the answer to that is no, except for the one guy who I think said yes. I feel if you even for a moment thought that the answer might be yes to that question, you need to make new friends and go out and watch a movie. There has to be more to who you are than a high school transcript. A high school transcript does not tell someone what problems you think need to be solved in the world. A high school transcript does not tell someone what you think are the most important things in someone else's heart. A high school transcript does not tell someone about the struggles you have at home or the experiences that you have out in the world. A high school transcript doesn't tell anyone anything about the relationships you build, why you build them, why they matter, and how you give back. So if you're using your essay to talk about nothing more than hard work, you're adding nothing new. My dad saw me do this once, and he was a cross-country runner in high school, and he was really mad. He was like, I use those skills every day. And I believe that. Hard work is powerful and it is important, and you have to have it. But your essay needs to be about more than just that. So if you want to write an essay about cross-country, I think that's awesome. What I want to know is, why do you run? What is it you're getting out of this thing? You pour all this time and energy and effort. You pour your literal sweat into this activity that no one is making you do. Why are you doing it? This thing that you feel a bond with, why do you feel that bond? Which is different from an essay that's like, what am I getting out of it? Why do I do it is really different from what do I get out of it? And that why do I feel connected to this? Why do I feel pulled to this? Even on an unconscious level. Some of you have made really deliberate decisions about what you're going to do extracurricularly, and some of you haven't. You've just done the thing that felt like fun. And neither of those is necessarily better or worse. But if you're going to write about your extracurriculars, you got to dig in deep and figure out, why do I want to do this? Why do I continue to do this? I could quit. I don't quit. Why haven't I quit yet? And that question of why, that requires a lot of introspection. That's not an obvious thing. So if you're sitting there thinking why do I run? Then it's great we're having this conversation now, because you have the summer to think about it. If there's something important to you and you don't know why it's important, now you have the summer to think about it. And then the last essay topic I want to discuss are essays about strange cultural upbringings. So a quick shorthand for this would be the Child of Two Worlds essay. You read a lot of these, especially at more selective schools. Not to stereotype too much, but these essays take a couple of different forms. One of them would be I like Hollywood movies and Bollywood movies. I eat pizza and naan. And I have a friend and his little sister wrote an essay that was about being both Israeli and American, and she wrote that I eat hummus and I like hummus, but I also like American foods too. And there's I don't know why people keep coming back to liking more than one kind of food. That's not a special thing. Lots of people like more than one kind of food. I like many kinds of food, including some foods from cultures I'm not a part of. And the trap that these essays fall into is they mistake identifiers for identity. And I want to unpack that a little bit. There's a big difference between the things you do that identify what culture or what heritage you have, and then what your identity is as a person, what your perspective is on the world. And I'll use my friend's little sister as an example. So she wrote this essay about being, a hummus-loving American, a hummus-loving American. Oh, my friend, a hummus-loving American. So she, I asked her some follow-up questions after I read the first draft of her essay. I was like, do your parents eat pork? And she said no. And I said, do you eat pork? And she said yes. And I said, well, what do your parents feel about the role of women in religion? And she was like, my parents are pretty traditional about that. And I was like, how do you feel about it? She's like, I am not traditional about that. And so there are elements of her parents' culture and her cultural heritage, I guess, for lack of a better term, that she's chosen to embrace, and other aspects that she hasn't, right? And the same thing will be true for all of you, right? There are things your parents give you in terms of values, and you embrace them, and other things your parents have in terms of values, and you choose not to. Maybe it's not a choice. Maybe it's just what you feel in your gut you would do. And so what I want to encourage you to think about, because a lot of schools ask this question, they'll ask like straight out in the application, tell us about the environment in which you were raised and how it has impacted you. And the temptation there is to like literally describe your environment, which is okay, but also your environment isn't something you chose. There's no agency in that. You know, your cultural upbringing isn't something you choose. There's no agency in that. And you want your essays to have an element of agency. You want them to be able to reflect what you can do and how you use it. And so what I would encourage you to think about is, how is my perspective different because I have this piece in my past? What is it that I see in the world that not everyone sees because of this voice or this influence? So change it from writing about your identity to writing about your perspective and the role that your identity plays in influencing and creating your perspective. You know, the whole reason that colleges talk about the importance of diversity is because whether we like it or not, things like race, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, religion, nationality, all these things, gender, all these things play a role in shaping our perspective, in shaping how we see and how we experience the world and how we see and experience other people. Some of that is good and some of it isn't. And so what these colleges are asking about when they ask that question in particular, talk about your cultural upbringing, talk about the environment that you raised, is they're asking a diversity question. What's the diversity that you bring? And they're doing it, some schools do it more artfully than others. And what I ask you to focus on a little bit is not just the pieces of your life that represent that diversity metaphorically, but also how is your perspective different because of the sum of your experiences and the sum of your upbringing. Just because like one parent is German and the other parent is like, I don't know, Uruguayan, does not necessarily make you an interesting person. You know boring people who have weird families. And you know interesting people who have boring families. And what you need to do here is figure out, like, well, how is the way I see the world interesting because of these things that people have given me? So these are the things you want to avoid. Now I'll talk very briefly about the things that I think work. Do you guys have any questions at this point? This is mostly depressing. No, okay. Do you have a question? You look like you thought for a moment.
Is there a better format in general thinking about how to write a college essay? Or is it always like answering this?
So that's a good question. So the question, I don't know if I could hear, the question was, like, if the 5-paragraph argumentative essay isn't the best format, then what's a format that works? So I'll back up and I'll say, I don't think there's anything wrong with the 5-paragraph argumentative essay, as long as you understand your point here is not to make a point. Like, you're not trying to argue or prove something necessarily, so much as you're trying to demonstrate something about how you see yourself, how you see ideas, or how you see the world, right? So the point of the essay is really to demonstrate your perspective on things, whatever that is. And if a 5-paragraph essay with a thesis statement feels like a natural way to do that, I don't think you need to run from it. So some of the people in the room are really comfortable sort of like blowing up the box and doing whatever they want, and maybe you've been itching for an opportunity to leave some of that behind, great, and run with it. But if you're comfortable with the 5-paragraph format, I think you can write an excellent essay as long as you're not making the kinds of mistakes that you were laying out. A couple things that I think can help in terms of formatting. Most students feel really uncomfortable writing an essay without an introduction, but most of the time you don't need the introduction. So a lot of really good essays tend to start in the middle. So what you can do, for instance, is you can go back and once you've written a draft, you can just like cover the first paragraph with your hand and say, does my essay make sense without an introduction? Yes or no? And if it does, awesome. Remove the introduction and focus on other things. Start in the middle. You can do a similar thing with the conclusion. So the other thing that students sometimes struggle with is like, it feels weird not to have an answer to a question. If your history teacher's like, write an essay on the impact you think George Washington had on the American Revolution, and you end your essay with, yeah, I just don't know, it's a complicated subject. Like, your history teacher's gonna be like, that's not an answer to anything. But if you're writing a personal statement, and you're talking about the things in your life that are like big and difficult and complicated and intertwined, there like isn't a good answer for a lot of that stuff. Like, what's the real impact that Dee Dee has had on Gray is probably a continually unfolding question that does not have one answer. And yet the temptation that you feel when you get to a conclusion is to tie everything up and to give it an answer. To be like, and here's what I've learned from this thing that's complicated and I don't really understand yet. And so sometimes I think structurally, essays, like, if part of what you're trying to say is that there's something difficult and complicated in the world, and then at the end of the essay, you're like, and this is how you make it simple. You're sort of like undercutting your own point. And so the other thing I'd encourage you to do is to think about the question of like, what's the honest conclusion? And the honest conclusion might be you're still wrestling with it. And so those are some structural things. So what are some topics that can work? The first topic, the first idea I want to focus on is the idea of small moments with big meaning. Not all, but a large percentage of the best essays I've read take something really small and breathe big meaning into it. They focus on something that everyone else would just walk by, and they figure out, what does this small thing mean to me that other people don't see? If part of what you're trying to do is make yourself distinctive in these essays, this is a really powerful way to do that. So the best essay I think I've ever read was an essay that a girl wrote about the difference in mechanical pencils and regular pencils. And she wrote that using a mechanical pencil is like bringing a laser gun into a sword fight. Like, you're going to win, but you're going to win without any grace or elegance. And I remember reading that and thinking, who the hell thinks like this? Yeah, she got it. The point her essay was making was about the tension of form and function. Like, she was describing the constant ongoing argument that exists between efficiency and aesthetics, between what's beautiful and what works. And the challenge of finding something that sits in both places, and how she was saying, if she has to choose, she'll choose beauty over efficiency. That was her essay. And she chose to make that stand in the difference between pencils. I mean, that's a really sophisticated idea. And that she could see that in something simple and explain it in a way that could make me, I don't care at all about stationery, and as some of you probably have nice pencil bags. It's like a thing some people have. And when I was in high school, I would literally walk down the hallways and look for a pen in the gutter that I could use, because that is how little I cared about my pens. And this girl, can you just picture me doing that, like in Baltimore along that hallway? The senior, Kalia was a college counselor at my old high school, so she knows all my.
He was not in high school when I was there.
No. But she was there. We walked the same hallways at different points in time. This girl made me sit back at my chair in Boston at the time, from where she was writing in Kentucky at the time, and she made me think about pencils differently. If you can make somebody think about the world around them differently, that's power in the admissions process. If you can make an admissions officer see something new in the world around them, that is exactly the kind of skill that they want you to bring into their classrooms. And it's a lot easier to do that if you pick something small and explain why this small thing matters to you. So you're walking around Manhattan and you see a billboard for, like, I don't know, skin whitener, and you are filled with the fury of 1,000 exploding suns, and you turn to share your rage with your friends, and they look at you like it's just advertising. It's like that everywhere. That's an essay. You're sitting in physics class, and your physics teacher very quickly talks about Dyson spheres or space elevators, and you're like, give me more. And the rest of the room looks like they're about to fall asleep, so the teacher moves on. That's an essay topic. You post something on Facebook, or you snap something you saw online about, Beyonce's use of makeup in the Lemonade videos, and you expect this long, interesting set of responses about the importance of being able to express yourself and what that means, and of subverting expectations even while conforming to them, and instead no one replies or hits the like button. That's an essay topic. All these things where you feel lit up and you turn to share your excitement with the rest of the world, and for some reason everyone else is like, those are essay topics. Anytime you have to sit there in your own head and wonder, wait, am I the normal one and everyone else is weird, or am I the weird one and everyone else is normal? Those are all essay topics. Some of them will be better than others. I did this.
Where does it find line between cliche and woke up in some rainbow and made my soul? And I changed my perspective on the world.
I think it's all about. I think that's a great point, but it's all about authenticity, right? So there's a good example of this. We can talk about service. I'll talk about service essays for a quick second, right? There are people. A lot of students write essays about community service and the importance of it, and there are some people where they wake up in the morning and they are thinking, like, how do I get people to care about this thing that they don't care about? And they go to sleep at night, and they're like, did I really do the thing I wanted to do today? Like, did it really matter? And if you're one of those people, you write a very different service essay than the kind of person that like drops in to do community service and then writes the service essay because they think it'll help them get into college. Like, a big part of the difference between like what's cliche and what isn't, usually the only difference between what's cliche and what isn't, is the amount of depth you can bring to it. And that depth is grounded in how much do you really think about this? Right? How much is this something that like really fires you up? Is this just like something cool that you saw and you like went and did a quick Wikipedia search and that was it? Or you went and did a Wikipedia search and like 4 hours later you're like still clicking on the next link?
But I mean, there's no way that girl was thinking about mechanical pencils in her free time. Like, I mean, in all
I disagree. The only way she could have written the essay in the way that she did is if she thinks about things like that in that way often enough that her brain has gelled it. Maybe she's not thinking specifically about mechanical pencils like that all the time, but she's thinking about that idea a lot. Sure. And then the mechanical pencil spikes her attention. It grabs her because it reflects this thing in the world that she's already felt connected to.
Essentially, it's just quality writing. You have that idea, you have that concept that's important.
You need to be able to write, but you also need the depth on the other side. It's got to be something you think about enough that you can translate this small thing into the big thing. And if you haven't thought about the big thing, you're not going to know how to translate it.
Right, the big thing, but where do you get the small thing?
You wait. Literally, you just wait. If it's something you care about, it'll hit you. Go ahead.
Well, it's kind of going off what Carol was saying, like with the other example about like post something and starting something and everyone likes it, like, doesn't that cross the line of being like superficial, pushing on the like, like what you're pushing for like validation?
I mean,
Like where's like
how old are you?
7.
Your entire life is about validation. I think this goes back to the point about like you got to be able to take the risk. You got to know, like, is this something I feel so strongly about that I need to share it? Right? Like, again, there's a difference between like, oh, so nobody hit the like button, I'm going to write my college essay about this, and nobody hit the like button, and I'm like, I'm kind of pissed off about it. This is important. Why does nobody else care? So I'm not telling you to write about something dumb. I'm telling you to pick something that someone else would say is dumb, and then explain why it's not. Explain why it matters in a big way to you. Do not explain why it should matter in a big way to someone else. That's like a mistake. If you end your essay with, you should think this, that's a problem. But you want to express yourself and what you care about with enough force that someone else is convinced by it. If you think about like the most impactful conversations that you've ever had, or the people that you really love to talk to, they're probably not people who are trying to convince you of something all the time. They're somebody who like they believe in something or they feel strongly about something, and that energy is infectious. When someone really cares about something, it's easy to care too. And that's the impulse you want to tap into here. That like nugget of empathy that makes you care because someone else cares. These are good questions. I appreciate it. And I appreciate the argument too. Second to that, you got to stick with what you love. This is the most important thing. Probably the biggest difference between what you're about to do and like what you do for class is no one's giving you a grade. There's like, if you write a fantastically written essay that does not say much about who you are, which is definitely a thing you can do. No one's giving you extra points for it. You need to be able to write, okay. But then you also need to have something to say. And when I would turn in the essays that I was like the most excited to turn in high school, those were almost always the essays where I got like the weakest grades. Because I'd turn in the essay and my teacher would give it back. She'd be like, this was very interesting, but you didn't exactly do the assignment. I'd be like, well, your assignment was boring. And my teachers did not appreciate that. Like if you're supposed to write an essay about, I don't know, East of Eden, or what's a book you guys read in English class? Beloved or Great Gatsby, right? If your teacher's like, write an essay about Great Gatsby, and you were like, I thought Beloved was more interesting, I'm going to write a second essay about Beloved instead, your teachers are not going to like that. You're not going to do well. But this is not that. Like, remember the point. Your goal is to make someone love you. It's to create an advocate. It's to get somebody so excited about what you care about that they go into a room and fight for you. If you write this essay, and even you don't care about the content of your own writing, why is someone else? Why is anyone else going to fight for you if you don't care about your own ideas? And that's really different for academic argumentation for school. You all have turned in essays that you do not care about and still done well enough on some of them. You could probably think of a time where you didn't care about an essay and still got a good grade. This is not that. Like, you have to feel something. Maybe it's anger, maybe it's pride, maybe it's excitement, maybe it's resignation, but you have to feel something with enough depth that it's worth talking about. And if you don't, the people reading these essays, who read literally thousands of them every year, they know the difference between an essay that was written with fire and an essay that was written meh. Not because you can't write, but because you didn't have something you wanted to say. You do not have to be a great writer to write a great essay. And many of the great writers don't write great essays because they're focused more on how good their writing is than on whether or not their idea matters. If you are not the kind of person that is like, I cannot wait to write 650 words about me, that's okay. But you got to find something that you do feel strongly enough that you want to write 650 words about it. You got to find another way to let yourself out of the cage. And if you're someone who likes to write and who's used to writing, one of the things that can be tricky here is like there's a difference between writing for the sake of writing and writing for your classes and writing for yourself. And some of you don't have a lot of practice with that, even if you're a good writer. And so you got to understand those differences. Do you guys have any questions? Yes?
The college application essay is only 650 words?
The Common App, yeah.
That's a lot of work.
650 words is like,
no,
what, a
it's
page and
not.
a third? About single-spaced. Yeah. 2 pages double-spaced.
That's tiny.
It's not that much for some of you, and for some of you that's going to feel like an eternity. So if you're someone who is used to getting to the end of your English essays and figuring out how to pad the margins and like change the line difference from like 1 to like 1.2, or like how do I replace all the periods with periods that are 1 font size larger so I can like get out, I'd like, A, your teachers know all these tricks, you're not fooling anybody, but more importantly, like if that's who you usually are when you write, then you have to find the topic that inspires you enough that the problem you have is how to cut it down, not how to pad it up. And if there isn't something in the world that you care about enough that you can talk about it for 650 words, that is a big problem. I'm not sugarcoating that. There needs to be something in the world that you give a shit enough about that you can write for 650 words. And if there isn't, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing with your life if there's nothing in the world you care about enough? So go find it. Spend the summer and make that your summer project. How do I find the thing I care about enough that I'm going to write 650 words about it? Okay, other questions? I'm going to take another 20 seconds. If there's no other questions, then we're going to take like a 5 or 10 minute break. Yeah?
So like, I would like to write my essay about like a big event in my life, and you were just talking about, like, so you're talking about how to write it about a small event that you think illustrates something or changed you. So how would you write it about like a big event?
So that's a really good question. So first I'll explain why I think sometimes the big events are tricky to write about. And the main reason why those are hard essays to write is because you tend to get lost in the narrative of explaining what happened. Like if it's a big event, then filling up the space just describing the event takes up a lot of room, often, not always, often, and then the amount of space that's left over for you to talk about, like, well, who am I now in the wake of, like, what's it given me? What's its influence on me been? Gets lost because you've spent 3.5 paragraphs setting up the scene. And so part of the challenge that you have if you're going to write a big event is, like, how do I weave my own perspective into the event enough that it's okay to do that? And there are lots of different ways around that, but that's the goal, right? I got to weave my own perspective in. Or what you can do, and depending on what the event is, and obviously we don't have a lot of time to get into that now, but the other thing you can do is you can just sort of like narrow the scope of time that you're describing within the event, right? So So if the event itself takes place over a month, then instead of talking about the whole month, you start somewhere in the middle and you talk about a day. If it's a day, you start somewhere in the middle, you talk about an hour. If it's an hour, you start somewhere in the middle, you talk about a minute, right? You find a way to sort of collapse the event you're talking about into a smaller period of time, and you leave out some of the context. And, you know, some things get left behind, but the 650-word essay is not that long, really. And so you're all going to have to leave something out, right? Like, you're never going to be able to fit the sum totality of who you are, or really any experience, into a 650-word essay. Like, if you can fit all of who you are into a 650-word essay, that's not good. So, and the same thing is true for this event, right? Like, you're never going to be able to get it all in. And so what you have to do is you just have to make thoughtful choices about, like, what am I going to keep out, even though it's important? Because the more important thing than describing the event is describing who I am now on the other side of it. Does that make sense? Okay, so we're going to take a 7-minute break. I'm going to time it, 7. And then at the end of 7 minutes, I'm going to start. I've been here enough to know that at Berkeley Carroll they're like lax about time sometimes. You guys sort of roll in when you're going to roll in. I respect that, but not so much I'm going to let you do it. So at 2:10 by my phone, 2:10 by my phone, which is 7 minutes from now, I'm going to start, and you better be back.
Oh, we were doing that?
We were. We didn't know, and I thought if I told you, it might decrease my chances of victory, so I kept it to myself. Okay. So we're going to move on. We're going to start talking about supplements. So these would be like, I assume you know this. If you don't, lots of schools accept the Common Application, and then many schools, in addition to the Common Application, also demand that you write additional supplemental essays. I'm going to be talking about supplemental essays to the Common App, but the truth is, the kinds of things we're going to be discussing would be the exact same things you need to do for just about any shorter essay topic. So for instance, if you're applying to the University of California, their essay prompts, at least the past years, they've been like, pick 4 of these 8 topics, write a 300-word essay about each of these. So this is all going to apply for any of those. So we're talking about before, we're just sort of broad concepts, and then specifically for the Common App. So now we're going to be talking about what do you do for shorter essays, and what can you take out of this that's useful for shorter essay topics. So let's begin. We're going to talk about the Common App. I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of an overview on how we got to where we are now. It's like kind of a history lesson, but I also think it's valuable because it helps explain like why schools do this and then why they're important. So one of the things that's not intuitive about supplemental essays is if you're applying to a lot of Common App schools, the Common App is the most important essay that you write for your college admissions process. But the supplements are the most important essays that you write for the individual schools. And I want to be able to explain what that means and why it's the case before we dive into the essays themselves. So the Common App. I don't know how many, 500 member schools now? 800 member schools. There are 800 schools that accept the Common Application. Schools that have basically open door policies. Anybody who applies gets in, to schools that deny 19 out of every 20 people. Engineering schools, nursing schools, liberal arts colleges, big universities. If there's a kind of school out there, they are a member of the Common App. And the consequence of this is that you have a lot of different people with a lot of different priorities and many, many different kinds of students applying who all need to be able to use the same form. And what happens in almost any circumstance where a lot of people need to agree on something. I went to a Quaker high school. I don't know if you know a lot about Quaker religious philosophy, but the idea of consensus is important. If you have 100 people in the room, you're like not allowed to do anything until all 100 of them agree. 99 people agree and 1 person disagrees, start over. And when you have a situation like that where you need a lot of people to agree, you end up with a lot of blandness. I don't know if any of you looked at the Common Application essay prompts? Were any of you like really excited to write them? You like read the prompt and were like, this is my jam! I cannot wait to describe an event that influences my person based on my upbringing or whatever. They're terrible prompts. And what happens when you give someone a boring question is you tend to get really boring answers. And so one of the struggles that you have is like, how do I take something boring and make it into something interesting, which is a lot more difficult than taking something interesting and making it interesting. And so what a lot of schools have done to get around that problem is they've introduced the supplements. Take a step back. So this is a school in New York, and these are the third column there. This one, this is the column I want you to look at. This is the number of applications that this school received from 1990 to 2011. And what you'll notice if you look at that column is that for the first 10 years or so, more than 10 years, almost 15 years, there's essentially no change in the applicant pool. It goes up or down from about 8,800. And then you get to 2005, which is a really long time ago, and all of a sudden the numbers explode. And you see the school almost double the number of applications it receives in less than a decade. Do you know what happened? What's the difference between 2004 and 2005?
Common App.
They just moved to the Common App. That's it. The school was on a proprietary application. They went to the Common App. Boom. Colby College, the class of 2018, they received 5,000 applications. The class of 2019, they received 50% more applications that 1 year. Class of 2022. So Colby College president, new president came in, very excited about him. He was like, we're going to double the number of applications, and we're going to do it in 5 years. People thought it was crazy, and then they actually did it. Do you know how they did that? No. Take another guess. Coalition app. What coalition app? You guys aren't. None of you were applying using the coalition app. They dropped their supplements. I mean, they did other things too. They did like a bunch of fancy marketing things that the president cribbed from his old university. But that first 50% wasn't marketing. That was just dropping the supplements. They had supplemental essays. They killed their supplements. 50% increase in 1 year, which is kind of bananas, isn't it? So what? So supplements are a big deal. If a school asks a supplemental essay prompt, if they're requiring you to answer it, this school has made a choice to sacrifice a huge volume of applications in exchange for the information they get back from the question. This is a school that has decided the answers that students write for this supplemental question is more important than a 50% growth in our application numbers. It may not feel that way to you, but they are sacrificing to ask that question. And so they take the answers to that question really seriously. Which is why the Common Application personal statement, the 650-word essay, might be the most important essay to your process. But if a school asks a supplement, that supplemental essay is going to be the most important essay for that school. Because they gave up a lot to make you answer. Here are some examples of supplemental essay prompts. This is the one that I'm sure you love the most. You don't. It's terrible. The Why Us. So there are lots of different versions of this. Lehigh, Colorado College, and the University of Pennsylvania, lots of different versions. There's a 150 version. There's a 650-word version. Basically the same idea. Why do you want to come here? You have to be able to answer it. What do you need to do with this essay? And your goal here is not to tell them things that they already know about themselves, which is the easy thing to do, is to just research the school and demonstrate your research. That's not what they want you to do. I mean, that's the bare minimum for what you have to do, but it's not getting all the way there. Because they know, like Lehigh knows that they're in the Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania. Penn knows that they're an urban school in Philadelphia. Colorado College knows that the mountains are nearby. If you tell them in those why us questions, I love that you're a school in the mountains. Colorado College knows that already. You've told them nothing new. And so the challenge here is to demonstrate how you connect. What's the emotional piece of your bond with them? They may be asking, why would you apply? But what they really want to know is, why would you be proud to come here? That's how you have to rewrite that question. Why would I be proud to be a student at this school? I graduated from Tufts University. Tufts is a mid-sized university located near a city, but not in a city, and accessible on mass transit. That is literally the reason I applied. I wanted to go to a city with subway systems. I'm not joking. That's it. That was my only criteria. I applied to 10 schools in DC and Boston because I thought New York would be too intense. I don't know why I thought that. And I wanted to go to a city with a subway system. And I didn't know Chicago had a subway system, so I didn't apply anymore. I stayed in Chicago. I did not have great college counselors.
I wasn't there.
You weren't there. Ms. Williams was a real person. But that's a terrible answer for why you want to go to school there. Like, when I go to alumni events for Tufts, like, when we're all sitting around, like, we don't do this that often, but when people are like, why they were proud to be a Tufts alum, nobody's like, I'm proud to have gone to Tufts because we were located a 15-minute walk from a subway station. I love that we were a mid-sized university located near a city, but not in a city. I was proud to be in the suburbs of Boston. Nobody says that. And so the reasons that you would give for why you apply are not the reasons you would enroll. You know, you're going to have a list of 10 schools, all of whom have certain qualities in common. And so the reason that you would attend this school over that school is not because they're all located in Philadelphia. And so what you want to be doing is you want to be able to talk about how you connect. What are the aspects of this school's personality or values or culture that you feel a connection to? And what are the facets of the school, what are the facts about who they are that have led you to believe those things are there? So, you know, it's not that the school has a major in biomedical engineering. That's not why you're applying, even if it is. It's that the school values certain things about the world, which leads them to have that program in the first place. And the major is a representation of that. And that's what you're connecting with. Do you understand? It's like a little bit more meta. But this is the gap between a good answer and a bad answer. You need to be telling them as much or more about who you are and what matters to you than you are telling them about themselves. This is an essay where you are demonstrating not who are they, but who are you and why have you connected. So here are some examples. These are all about 150 words, so it gives you an idea of like how much you can accomplish in a relatively small amount of space. Therefore, a fictional college named Thoreau University, but whatever. Your international comparative literature major drew me instantly. I want to explore film and literature as vehicles of social and cultural significance to discuss the parallels of transnationalism in cinema and literature, and then it goes on from there. This would be a student from Singapore. I made this up, it's not real, but this is like what a good answer to this looks like, or can look like. The whole essay is about one major, just that they have the major, but the essay is not about the school, but about who this student is and why this major is important to them, and why they believe this major signals something important about the school. And then the other example I'm going to use, do you guys want another? Can I move on? Okay. I read the list of engineering projects at Thoreau as voraciously as my peers read their Twitter feeds, although I don't know what high school students use Twitter. I'm an innovator, passionate about robotics and ready to create. I only need the right place for my ideas to take flight. That place is a school that supports students' efforts to create a robo cupcake decorator. Where else could my observations of life, forms, and nature be engineered into a robotic caterpillar? How many schools have a music engineering minor that inspires students to create an electric harp? Thoreau is where I can learn to be my kind of engineer. So the first student was talking about a specific major. This student is like talking about just weird stuff that they've seen and how the weird stuff makes them feel like my kind of engineer is at your school. Have any of you visited a college or university and like from the moment you set foot on campus you just knew you hated it? You just like, you could just tell, you just knew the place was filled with people who you hated, and the sooner you could leave, the better. And your parents were like, no, we've got to go do the tour. And you were like, I'm not coming here. I don't know why we can spend any more time on this campus. And your parents were like, we signed up. We drove all the way here. And you were like, let's go get a coffee because this is a waste of my time. And your parents like made you do the information session anyway. And then you left and were like, I still hate it. I don't know why you thought I was going to change my mind because of what some admissions officer said in 45 minutes. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
Have you had the opposite experience? Where you set foot on a campus, particularly like in school session, and you could just tell this was a place that was filled with people who were already your friends and they just didn't know it yet? So, like, why did you feel that way? What was it that you saw that represented that? Some schools will be really explicit, talk about academics, and you don't have a choice, you gotta talk about academics. But some schools will say, like, tell us why, in a really broad way. And if you had an experience on campus Where the first person you saw had a backpack with like a patch from a band that you really liked, and you stopped and said, I like that band, then you had a 15-minute conversation with a total stranger, and we're like instant best friends and exchanged email addresses. Tell that story. If that's why you felt connected, that's real. Don't run from that. My Fitbit says I have 10,000 steps today. Yeah, go ahead.
If part of your connection with the school is that someone you know, or like a senior who just graduated this year is going there and you know them and you're close with them, is that something you can write about?
Yes. Yeah. If you're really worried, ask, and you shall receive answers. Some schools will be like, we really want something more substantial than that, but most schools, I think that that's okay. And for the most part, the folks who you have in your corner have enough knowledge to be able to steer you in the right direction if somehow you've gone off track. But for the most part, absolutely. If an admissions officer came and you had like a conversation with them, you were like the only person who showed up for that school visit, and it was a school that wasn't on your list, but like somebody made you go, and you got there, and were like, oh, actually a really great conversation, I think I'm going to apply now. Maybe leave out the part where somebody forced you to go. But it's totally acceptable to be like, I had this great conversation with blank, where we talked about these things, and it was just the first time I'd had a conversation about this stuff in a way that made me really excited about these specific things in this way, and now I want to come. Tell that story. If a school says specifically, write about academics, and it's a little different. But the overarching concept of like, why do you connect on an emotional level? Why would you be proud to be there? How do you know you'd be proud, right? Like those questions are the same ones you have to answer even if it's a straight up academic version. What is it about this program that makes me feel like if I told people I went to school here and studied this, I'd be really excited to share that with the world? Any other questions? That was a really good one.
Yes.
No, this is a good one. They're both good. You were not saying about it. They're just good in really different ways. So part of what I'm trying to show is, thank you for asking that. Part of what I'm trying to show is like the diversity of potential options. One of them is like really broad about a major. The other is really specific about some things that other people might find stupid, but this kid thought were really important.
Do you have an example of a poorly written supplement essay?
Yeah, and I can do it right now. I'm really excited to attend Tufts University because of its world-renowned international relations program. The Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy is a school that has produced many important thinkers in the field of international relations. Additionally, I have always enjoyed the city of Boston and feel a connection with it, and so I am very excited to be able to take advantage of the things the city of Boston has to offer. And if you're an admissions officer, you read a lot of those answers. A lot. Because, or a version that might be more realistic would be like a student goes online specifically to research this question. They find a couple facts and they're like, I would be so excited to attend Cultural Legacies of the Atomic Bomb as taught by Professors Hosea Harada and Professor Steve Cohen of the Japanese Department and Child Development Department respectively. Which is like a lot of these essays. It's like they found a couple classes they liked online and now they're writing about them. And they'll name drop the names of the professors and the full names of the courses in a way that actually makes them feel like further from the thing, because anybody like at the school knows that he's not like Professor Stephen Cohen, he's just Steve Cohen, right? And like you as the admissions officer know him, and so it's like weird to hear somebody call him Stephen. And so if you're gonna do that, like if you like, I don't know anything about this school, I'm applying to it because my mom's making me and now I gotta research an answer and you're gonna go online. The trick to doing the online research is to read about the school until you have a legitimate emotional response. Until you read about something and you think, oh, that actually would be fun. Or this would be exciting. Or I didn't even know that was a thing. And then you write about that moment that you had, how you had the moment, and why you had the moment. But for the most part, the bad answers are just the ones that are like factual descriptions of the school. And I would say that that's like half the ones you read as an admissions officer are basically just factual representation about the school and the student. Yeah?
Can you just expand more on how you talk about yourself in this description of like how would you expand on yourself?
Yeah. So this is doing a great job of that, right? It's like, so what does it mean? Let's give him a name. What do you want his name to be? This is a guy. Joel. Sorry. So Joel, right? So Joel in Singapore from Raffles Institution. That's who this is. This is Joel in Singapore. And so what do you know now about Joel? This is a 100-word essay. Well, you know more than that. You know that he talks using words like parallels of transnationalism. You know that he's interested in the intersection of cinema and literature. You know that he's anti-establishment. And if you know anything about Singapore, you know that Singapore is like the king of the establishment. So here's an anti-establishment kid in a country that is full of establishment figures. You know that he's read enough from Singaporean writers to be able to understand the differences between generations. There's actually a lot that you can learn about the kid here from reading this. And the only thing that you really get about the school is that they have an international comparative literature program, which, is a lot of words. And by connecting the dots, you can kind of see, okay, Joel understands what international comparative literature actually is, because he's able to describe the examples of it that he sees around him in his local context, and how he can be excited, so study this so that he can have a new understanding of that. So this is I'm not surprised I'm getting questions, because this is pretty subtle. You look so unsatisfied by my answer. Which is okay. So we'll do this one. So, what does it mean to be, okay, what's this kid's name? What's that? Kyle? All right. So here's Kyle. So what have you learned about Kyle? What does it mean to be Kyle? What do you see here?
Well, I mean, the first sentence you see that Kyle doesn't necessarily identify with people who are constantly on Twitter and social media.
Yes. Great. You learned that Kyle does not identify with people who are constantly on social media. What else do you learn about Kyle? What's that?
She's a little bit edgy.
She's a little bit edgy.
Salty with tears.
What else did you get? What's that? Go on. Because this is what your admissions officers are going to be doing. Passionate about robotics. What else?
Also very interested in nature.
Interested in nature. Yeah. I see a kid who's interested in how to do the unexpected with reasonably straightforward skills. Who's drawing inspiration from common objects and trying to figure out how can I engineer something from something normal. Right? Robo-electric decorator, electric harp. This is not stuff that Kyle put here deliberately. Kyle was not I'm going to demonstrate that the way my mind works is I like to find normal things and then engineer the hell out of them. That was not, I'm sure Kyle did not do that on purpose. But by talking about the connection in a way that is authentic, by talking about that connection in a way that has a little depth, even though it's a 100-word answer, there's all this stuff that you can see here when you read between the lines. Because Kyle's focused more on where he connected and being specific about that than on what he sees at Thoreau. Does that make some more sense? It's this is really subtle and it's difficult. I'm not trying to make this seem easy, because it's not easy. If this feels to you like something that's going to be hard, it's because it is. But it's also where knowing how critical your answers to these questions are becomes really important, because just about everything in your application, if you really screw it up and everything else in your application is okay or good, you can still get in. The answer to the why us question, if it's bad, this is probably the only part of your application that all by itself can completely unmake your candidacy. I don't want to I hope you feel I'm not trying to scare you into things too much. But this is one where this is really the case. If everything else in your file is good and this feels terrible, that by itself is enough to sink you. So spend some time, right? If you're applying to schools, spend some time and figure out what's my connection to this place. Yeah, follow up.
So some schools I ask a question?
Yeah.
So for those, are we supposed to like leave the
Nope.
participants?
No. A school that's not asking it, you don't got to worry about that. I mean, it's nice if if you go into an interview, at some point the interviewer is going to be like, why do you feel connected to this, or why do you want to come here? And you'll have to do the same thing in an interview that you have to do here. So if you do interview for schools, just be prepared to do this in non-written form. But if the school doesn't ask you to do it in written form and there's no interview, then you're off the hook. Yeah?
So where's the line between, because the idea of this is saying I am this, and this without actually explicitly saying it. But
Yeah.
over here,
Yeah.
Kyle is explicitly saying
Yep.
I am this, that, and that. So why is that not a pretentious kid but an interesting candidate?
Because this essay topic is only 100 words. If you only have a 100-word essay, you just have you been told show, don't tell? Yeah, you don't have a choice. I mean, there are things being shown here that are not being told, right? Kyle did not say, I like to engineer the hell out of normal objects in my life, right? But it's here, it's being shown. But there are other things he's telling, and that balance moves the shorter the essay topic gets. So a 650-word essay, there's no reason to have to tell, because it's long enough that you can show. A 300-word essay, maybe you got to start telling a little more. A 100-word essay, some things you're going to just have to tell. And so part of what you want to do as writers, and this is why it takes a couple drafts sometimes to get these right, and some of you write a version and it's terrible and you throw it out and start over, is because finding the balance is hard. And it's a great question. And so you can see here there's more telling. So the shorter the essay prompt, the more you're going to have to tell.
Is it not going to feel acute, or I don't know the proper word for this, but very kind of...
I mean, you got to do what's natural for you. Some people, this is not hard, and it's easy for them to talk like this. And if that's not you, then you write a different essay. This is where you got to be yourself, and then the stuff leaks out on its own. Okay, we're gonna move on.
And I know this thing before you in generation of literature or whatever.
Yeah, I agree.
Are you sure the admissions officer? I mean, you would know. The admissions officers are going to be always capable of understanding that historical topic you're talking about.
Oh, absolutely not. But it doesn't matter. It's okay to talk over their heads. It's a 100-word essay. You don't have time to go into detail about what this means. I mean, if you find this essay pretentious, so do I. But also, some degree of pretentiousness is kind of inevitable if you're talking about someone who's studying comparative literature theory. How do you do comparative literature in a way that's not pretentious? I'm sure it's possible. I've just never seen it done. So if you find this pretentious, I don't think that's such a problem for this particular kid talking about this particular thing. And if you're this is where you can't put everything in, and so some stuff has to get left out. And the thing that he chose to leave out is the context on exactly what this means. But that's okay, because I'm more interested in that, right, Joel? I'm more interested in that he's thinking about this than in exactly what it means. Yeah.
I mean, but also anything that you find interesting that you're going to talk about is going to sound pretentious to somebody.
Yes.
It's not interesting.
Yeah. Yes. I don't disagree with that. Okay. Oh, yeah.
Just going to say, don't you feel like there's a certain amount of gut instinct that the writer will often have when they're writing something that feels untrue, when they're writing something that feels pretentious, when they're writing something that feels cliche?
Yeah. I mean, as individuals, you know when you're out of your depth and when you're trying to force it to work. I mean, I think a big critical thing is just don't use words you're not familiar with. That's an obvious one. You can sound smart and sound like a normal person at the same time, and long words that aren't really yours, it's not really necessary to use. I would argue that Singaporean kid, I think that the use of those words feels pretty natural in that instance. I mean, it's pretentious, but I think it feels pretty natural. Versus somebody else who's trying to use the same language but hasn't had as much use with it, you're just not going to know as much what to do. And so it comes across feeling a little dissonant for some of those students. But, I think one of the ways that you know whether or not you're writing something that works is whether you feel like you found something good to say. I mean, one of the best ways to know that your personal statement is going to land where you want it to land, as an example, is do you feel like you, as the writer, learned something new about yourself by having to write it? Does the act of creating it force you to ask questions about yourself that you learned something new? And then if you had that experience in the process of writing it, your admissions officer is likely to have that experience in the process of reading it. And I'd say the same thing for this, right? If part of what you're trying to do is demonstrate a level of excitement and a level of connection to the school, like, you know when you're writing it, like, am I excited? Do I feel connected on this thing? And if the answer is yes, then you're probably in safer space than if you're like, I just need something, let me just write it down. The advice you get from like a lot of adults is like, don't procrastinate. If you procrastinate, you're gonna end up in that second group where you're just writing anything for the sake of writing it, and that is true. But I'm also like realistic. Like, have any of you ever not procrastinated just because someone told you not to procrastinate? Like, I cannot even imagine one person in the room. Like, I mean, fantastic, I love you both. I do not have the discipline for that. Like, it's not like one person being like, don't procrastinate writing this, and I'll be like, oh, I was going to, but then they told me not to, and so now I won't.
Well, it's because I'm already procrastinating anyway, so like.
You've gotten all the procrastination out of the way.
Yeah.
So I'm realistic. Most of you are going to write these at the last minute. But I want you to know what you're looking for when you're doing it. So these are other essay prompts. Boston College, Jesuit education considers the liberal arts a pathway to intellectual growth and character formation. What beliefs and values inform your decisions and actions? And how do you act for the common good? University of Chicago, you're on a voyage in the 13th century sailing across the tempestuous seas. What if suddenly you fell off the edge of the earth? And then Whitman College, the excellent, ridiculously nice school on the West Coast. Ask this question. Choose a facet of your current community that inspires you. How will you bring the sense of inspiration to your new life at Whitman? So, I see you all got a lot of hands up. For the moment, I'm going to power forward. I'll come back if I can. What I want you to take away from this is, so like, remember again the sacrifice. These schools have sacrificed something important, volume of applications. They think it's important, in exchange for your answers to these questions. One of the things that you can do is, these questions are often very strong signalers for what qualities these schools value in the admissions process, for the character and values of the school themselves. Boston College, which is a Jesuit school, has a motto, I think it's service to others. They ask a question that's explicitly about common good. What does common good mean in your life? Chicago, which is a school that, at least by reputation, is a place that is famously intellectual without necessarily a point to all the intellectualism. A school that's sort of less interested in the use of an idea and more interested in the idea itself. I don't know if that's actually true anymore, but it's certainly their reputation. And they ask this question that's like not about anything except talk out loud about this weird idea. Whitman, which is a school in the Pacific Northwest where people are like so nice it's almost painful how nice they are, asks this question that's explicitly about community. How do you connect, right? It's not that Chicago doesn't value community, it's not that Whitman doesn't value the intellect, they do, but they're telling you something about the priority relative of those values. And so one of the things you can do with these questions is you can pull out stuff about the school from what they choose to ask. So we've covered this mostly. Some things that you can do here is look at the question. If the question is playful, that means your voice can be a lot more playful. If the question is like very formal, it means that you're probably safer staying on the more formal side. So the common application is generic, it goes to everybody, it's really hard to read into it. But these supplemental questions, you often can read into the questions and get a sense of like, what kind of voice is the school looking for me to use? Not 100% of the time, but you can use it as a vague guide. With shorter questions, demand different structure, more tell, less show. You got me there early, I appreciate that. And bigger risks are okay. It's useful to show a risky essay to somebody else and just say like, do you feel like I've stepped over the line? Your college counselors are great resources for this. But particularly for your reach schools. If you're applying to a reach school, by definition, you're applying to a school that is almost definitely going to deny you. A reach school is a school where if you get in, you should be very surprised. That's what it means. So if you were going to get into a school that you are not supposed to get into, you may have to stretch yourself in a different kind of way than you would at your likely schools or foundation, than you would at your foundation schools. It doesn't mean you take a risk just to do something ridiculous. Don't do that. That's dumb. But if there's something that you want to talk about and you're sort of like, should I, shouldn't I? Your reach schools are the spaces where you might want to say yes, where otherwise you feel like you ought to say no. Roll the dice a little more, because if you don't, you're not getting in. And this is where your college counselors are really valuable, because they can help you decide which risk is too risky, and also which schools are reach schools, and where that risk is important, and where it's probably a bad idea. But recognize that for your reach schools, you probably deliberately want to take some risks. And then, now we're going to do a writing exercise. This is a lot more fun. I promise I'll come back to questions if we have time. So, here's how we're going to do this writing exercise. You guys are so skeptical. Just trust the process. Aren't you fans of the 76ers? Trust the process. Right? Okay. Everyone, take out your phones. Okay, take out your phones. Open up whatever note-taking or writing app is on your phone. Something that you can put a list on. Also make sure to put your phone in airplane mode, because if it goes off while your phones are out, that's awkward, and I will notice, and I may make you answer the phone call, which would be double awkward. So airplane mode or silent, airplane mode. So open up the Notes app, and this exercise we're going to do, it's going to be very simple. You're going to create 3 lists. And I'm going to ask you to add the headers for each of these lists, and then we're going to spend some time filling them out. So you're going to write this into your phone. List 1. A list of things that are interesting to me. Too old? Quote, a list of things that are interesting to me. How would you know what's interesting to me? I don't know. A list of things that are interesting to me. Is that more clear? Not to us, because it's a specific individual person. It's an individual to me. I've done this at dozens of other schools, and you were the only ones that ever had problems in that direction. I know you were doing it just to troll me. And I love you for it. List 2. List 2. A list of things that are important to me. We're going to get to that in a moment. Big answer. We're going to get to that in a moment. Trust the process. Things that are important to me. And then when you're done typing that, just look up and I'll know you're done.
That's it.
And we're going to get there. Things that are interesting, things that are important to me. Look up when you're done typing, and I'll give you the 3rd list. All right, list 3. Just write them down. List 3. A list of things that are interesting or important about me. Things that are interesting or important about me. So list 1, things that are interesting. List 2, things that are important to me. List 3, list of things that are interesting or important about me. And then when you're done, look up and I'll know you're done. I'm just letting you know. Okay, so what are the lists? Interesting to me, important to me, interesting or important about me. Okay, so what are the lists? So a list of things that are interesting. This is a list of stuff that makes your brain excited. This is a list of things that are intellectually fascinating. Things your brain wants to know more about. Doesn't have to be important, doesn't have to be academic. List 2, a list of things that are important. This is a list of things that matter to your heart. So list 1 is your brain, list 2 is your heart. Things that feel emotionally significant. Things that matter. And these can be the same things, right? Like you could say the lobbying forces that make fixing climate change difficult are both interesting and important, right? You could have things there, but you also could have them separately. Like I think Justin Timberlake's career reinventing himself from Disney child star to boy band to solo artist to actor and all these other things. I think that's interesting. I would not describe it as something that matters to me, but you might. You might say that like being able to reinvent yourself is really important, and so seeing someone else do it matters to you, right? And then the third list is a list of stuff that makes you amazing. A list of reasons why someone should want to be your friend. A list of reasons why someone should want to talk to you. There are a list of things that you've overcome or done that matter. And the trick to these lists is to be specific. So something that's interesting is not art. It's, I don't know, postmodern art. Well, it's not postmodern art, it's postmodern art's influence on architecture. It's not postmodern art's influence on architecture, it's their influence on this specific building, right? So drill down and try to be specific. If you're vague, it's less helpful. Does that all make sense? And so what we're going to do for the next 5 minutes, maybe less, is you're going to come up with things for the lists. I'm going to ask you to come up with at least one thing for each list you are comfortable saying out loud. Some things can be private. You don't have to. I'm not going to make you all read everything, but I will randomly call on some of you to share your things, and you want to be prepared. So at least one thing in each list you're ready to say out loud. Go. What? Don't get it. I've already done This is really a solo exercise. So we'll get to the sharing part later. You should come up with at least one thing for each list and just fill out as much as you can for each list. I can see you guys. I'm like right here. I'm not that far away. Another minute and a half left. You can do it. I believe it. More seconds. Finish strong. Keep going. It's hard. You can do it. Okay, finish writing the one you're writing right now, and then look up. Look up when you're done writing. Not all the way. So I'm gonna get into this in a moment. I'd just like to take a quick moment now, because we're getting close to it. I'd just like to say how much I appreciate all of you being here with me today. I love how present you are and how engaged, and the great. Some of you ask really smart questions, and those you haven't, I can tell you're like listening most of the time. I know this is the last thing you got to do before summer, and I know that it's probably a struggle to like sit inside when freedom awaits. And I just want to say how much I appreciate how present you've been here with me, and how lucky I feel to be present with you. We got to hustle. We got to hustle, guys. I appreciate it. So before we get into the list, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to ask, which list did you think was hardest? And you're going to raise your hand when I get to the list. So list 1, interesting. List 2, important. List 3, interesting or important about me. So if you felt list 1 was the most difficult list to fill out, raise your hand. If you felt list 2 was the most difficult list to fill out, raise your hand. If you felt list 3 was the most difficult list, yeah, that's pretty normal. So, I think that that's kind of sad. I don't mean that in like a judgmental way. I just mean that like if I had said to you, write a list of your weaknesses, would that have been easier or harder? Easier. If I had said write a list of your areas for improvement, would that be easier or harder? Easier. So I think that's sad. And I think that there's something there to be said about what it's like to be in school and to be a teenager, where it's a lot more common for someone to demand that you reflect on your failures than on your successes. If you screw up and your mom finds out and she's like, go to your room, I can't believe what you did. But if you're succeed, you get a great grade or you win a prize, it's not like you come home and your mom's like, go to your room, I can't believe what you did. You're asked to reflect on your failures, but you're very rarely asked to reflect on your successes. And as a result, for most of us, most of the time, and I think especially for those of you who are still in high school, it's a lot easier to talk about where we suck than where we're great. And so the reason we're doing this on our phones, and if it was list 1 that was the hardest or list 2 is the hardest, it's the same deal. Here's why you're doing this on your phones, those of you who did. Is I want you to be able to document the moments when they happen. So you asked that great question earlier, how do I find this, I was like, you just wait for it to find you. You don't have to go looking for it. If it's something that's really important, it'll bump into you. And so I want you to have this with you, so the next time you're sitting around thinking oh, this would make for a good, this is the thing that's interesting about me, and I didn't realize it until somebody else was surprised that it was true. You're in a position to just write it down and add it to the list. So that when you have to write these drafts, when you have to write the answers to the supplemental essays, here's some examples. You can answer each of these supplemental essay questions. This is just a cross-section of random supplemental questions. You can answer any of these questions with something from one of those lists. Those lists are the answers to these questions. And I want you to have it with you so you can add to it as you go. So that's why we're doing this like this. So if you don't mind, could someone, if you struggled with list 1, for instance, I think it's really helpful to hear how other people answer it, not necessarily because you have their answers, but because sometimes hearing somebody else talk gets your own gears turning. This is especially true if you're not used to talking about yourself. Hearing someone else talk about themselves can be really important. So is anybody comfortable volunteering to share something from list 1? Yeah?
Just one thing.
Yeah, just one thing.
Psychogenic diseases.
Psychogenic diseases, I don't even know what that is, but it sounds fascinating. Someone else? Yeah?
Christian fundamentalism.
Why is Christian fundamentalism interesting?
Because it's wrong.
That's
As a rule of thumb.
Well, so I could argue one of the ways to make yours more specific is to say I think Christian fundamentalism is wrong.
When I want to establish that when I say wrong, I don't mean
No, I understand.
it's so wrong. It's literally just not accurate to the Bible.
I understand.
Thank you.
But that's what I'm saying, right? So that's the point about specificity. Drill down. Somebody else? Yeah.
Magic science theory.
Magic science theory.
Yes, it's all for a fictional world that I'm creating for a story that I'm writing, and it is fascinating.
Cool. Can I get Something from your list? The first one.
I said music.
Cool. And what about music is interesting to you?
The way it's created, beats and all that.
So how beats are created? I love it. It's a great answer. Who wants to share from list 2? Go ahead.
Environmental justice.
Environmental justice matters to you, Susan. I love it. So go ahead. List 2. What's that? Racialization of the New York public school system. I think that's a fantastic answer. How did that not matter? Go ahead. Share one of your things from your list. Yeah. Baseball. How is baseball important? Yeah. Not why is it fun. Not why does it matter. Like why does it matter to you? Don't listen to Gray. Give me your own answer. Because you played it since you were young. So here's a good example. Here's a good example. No, this is a really good example, right? So you got this thing that matters to you. You have a sense of why, kind of, right? That you've been doing it for a long time, and it goes back into something in your past that's important, right? But you have to be able. But you need to be able to answer the question, why does it matter to me now? And so this is a really good example of how, like, sometimes putting something down on one of these lists and not having a clear answer yet, which is okay, can help point you in the direction of the things you need to be able to do. Which is to ask, like, it was important then, why do you keep with it? Why is this something you haven't quit? You've quit a bunch of other things that you did when you were little. So why not this? So what's something interesting or important about you? And for this one, if you give me one, then I'll make one of the adults in the room, including myself, give you one in return. Go ahead.
I'm a twin.
You're a twin. And why is that interesting or important?
I guess it's unique and
I didn't say why is it important to everybody else. I said why is it important to you?
because it's cool. Like it's fun.
All right, I'll give you one of mine. One time I made the front page of Reddit. Someone else. I'll tell you. Come up. I'll tell you later. Nope.
Email him.
One more. Go ahead. You already graduated high school in a different country. I think that's a great answer. Miss Williams.
I wear sparkly shoes every day because glitter reminds me of making happy.
I love that. What a great answer. Okay, one more from someone who hasn't gone in the back. I like it. Go ahead.
Oh my God, thank you.
You're welcome. Something interesting or important about you?
I put one of my honest opinions. First thing, the rabbit hole of extremist political philosophy at exactly 1 a.m. in the morning.
Hot damn. Wait, read that louder. Some people missed it.
Traversing the rabbit hole of extremist political philosophy, usually partaking around the time of 1 p.m.
Thank you very much for playing that game with me. I appreciate it. I just want to say to you, like, keep working on those lists and keep building them out, because some things in there will be great essays and some things won't. But there's a lot of stuff in there that has the potential to be fantastic answers to these questions. Have a wonderful summer. Much love.